Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. Well, a few years ago I played through Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. And what can I say, it was not a perfect game by any means. It is still one of the best games I've ever played. It had a huge overworld, which you could explore almost anywhere if you just leveled up your stats enough to do it. A lot of creativity and the challenges that were faced to you, and a really good post-apocalyptic overworld that was just a joy to explore and figured out what happened and what life may have been like before this calamity Ganon wrecked everything. I think Nintendo sensed that question and decided to give us a spin-off where we get to travel back 100 years before the calamity began and see this Hyrule, and they decided to give this spin-off project to Koei Tecmo, the company responsible for the Dynasty Warrior series. Yes, the spin-off, what could easily be considered of the most Western JRPG ever, was sent to Koei Tecmo to make a Dynasty Warrior spin-off, which is odd to think about. When you think of the gameplay of Dynasty Warriors games, it's about as far as you can go in the opposite direction of the Breath of the Wild game. And while I don't hate the Dynasty Warriors franchise, to be honest, I've never even really played a main entry of the franchise. I have played a lot of the licensed spin-offs, dealing with Gundam, or One Piece, or Dragon Quest. And honestly say I put them in the Neptunia category. Not bad or god-awful by any means, but at the same time cheap, quickly made, and you can oftentimes see the shortcuts used in making them. So basically, unless you're a hardcore fan of the games, you're better off waiting until they're under $20, or else you might feel like you're ripped off. But I paid $60 on day one for this game, so was it worth it? Well, let's find out. The game opens up with scenes that people who have played Breath of the Wild are very familiar with. Ganon coming back, the Guardians going out of control, and Zelda finally awakening her powers, but too late to stop the oncoming calamity that will last 100 years and leave Hyrule in ruins. Her power awakening, though, awakens a small guardian inside Hyrule Castle who opens a gate through time and jumps through it a few years into the past when this whole thing started. Monsters have started to appear in Hyrule, and the king is doing his utmost to prepare his people for Calamity Ganon's return. Unfortunately, his daughter Zelda has not awakened her divine powers yet, and to make matters worse, the hero which wields the sword of Evil's Bane has not shown up to lend any assistance. Until then, the king has assigned a low-level knight named Link, who has proven himself on the battlefield to protect her. And yet, no surprising plot spoiler here, said knight is the hero chosen by said sword. From here, the first half is basically kind of what you would expect from what little backstory we got in Breath of the Wild, only with R2-D2 following along. Link and Zelda have to find the 4 champions, deal with the Yiga clan screwing things up, and trying in vain to get Zelda to awaken her powers. And of course finding the Master Sword and its quote-unquote chosen wielder. That is until about halfway through the game. And then the calamity strikes, and since Nintendo did not have the balls to pull a Final Fantasy Crisis Core ending, R2-D2 finally shows why he's entered this picture, and somehow uses his power to manipulate time, so basically, you get a happy ending, and yes, you now get a happy ending, and you of course get a happy ending, and yes, even the king here gets a happy ending. And Zelda and Link get a less melancholy ending, where they're no longer outside of their time trying to figure out how to rebuild Hyrule after Ganon destroyed it. The last half goes into new territory as some of the characters from Breath of the Wild's future show up to lend a hand. Zelda awakens her sealing power before Link gets critically wounded, and the 4 champions get rescued before they get killed, and the 4 divine beasts get stolen by Ganon. Yeah, the last half is almost pure fan fiction, and a whole lot of JRPG-esque storytelling. Again, kind of ironic, considering how Breath of the Wild was taking pages from the Western RPG books. Overall, though, despite the ending losing a lot of its dark edge, I did enjoy the game's stories. The characters, though, aren't strong, but we do see a good character arc in the Zelda character, and we have a lot of good cutscenes fully voiced that were a good treat. Overall, it's a decent story and it does a pretty good job trying to relay a story and keeping up the pace with the gameplay. Enjoyed it, not perfect, not great, but I thought it was good. The biggest difference you will notice going into Hyrule Warriors is Link can now kill more than 5 enemies without having any of his weapons breaking. Okay, I get it, kid, just a little bit. Again, this is more of a Dynasty Warriors games, and for those who haven't played it, they're more like brawlers where you basically press X a bunch of time and then you'll press Y to do a finishing move of some sort. With the combos you can do, you can rack up dozens of enemies' kills in a matter of seconds. Despite the amount of enemies on screen and the very little slowdown seen in the game itself, it turns out the enemies themselves are never too bright in these games. The smaller grunts will never cause you any trouble and rarely even attack. They're there just to make you feel like a badass as you power your way through them. The bosses and moderate enemies that appear when you try to take over a fort in the game are where the real challenges come from, and the way they are handled in this game is just so memorable compared to other Dynasty Warrior games I've played. Unlike a lot of the other Dynasty Warrior games where I have to basically do a quick attack or figure out some sort of spell to beat them, there is quite a bit of strategy on these larger enemies, similar to kind of like a game like Punch-Out. You have to deal with them by dodging their attacks and then find a way to break their defenses by hitting them when that little pie slice appears. And if they wind up doing a big move, you have to grab the Sheikah Slate and hit them with the right special attack to stun them long enough to really weaken them and take out the more of their special gauges doing so. Hit them enough to where that red pizza slice goes down to 0 and you can attack them with a strong finishing move. And it's really fun getting to do this. The only drawback I can think about this whole dealing with moderate enemies and bosses with the Sheikah Slate. Each of the Sheikah Slate's moves are useful and powerful, but it's risky using it against the boss fight in these larger encounters because if they pull a move while it's still charging, because it has to charge up every time you do a move with it, you can easily be left eating an enemy attack that you can't block. But despite that, the way these fights are done are still a lot of fun, with just the right amount of choices and the way to approach them to make them a little bit more open-ended than past Dynasty Warriors. Is it as open as Breath of the Wild is when it comes to the combat? No, but I did find these fights still enjoyable. Speaking about varied, though, there is a huge cast of characters you get to play as. Each one of them brings something unique and useful to the field. There are some I really do enjoy playing as, maybe not so much as some of the others, but here's a few of my favorites. Link, which is kind of your standard character. He has multiple weapons he can choose from. Impa and her shadow clones. And Falco, Rivali. Yeah, he's just Zelda's version of Falco from Star Fox. They were usually one of my favorites to go through because each one of them has some sort of trait that makes them special. And while each one of them has different combos that make them useful and fun, what really can set them apart is the way the Sheikah Slates are used. The Sheikah Slate's abilities are different for each character. Link can aim bombs that he throws, while Zelda will use this remote control things, and others will just throw big bombs around. It's really a fun way to figure out how each of them will use each of the Sheikah Slate spells and put them to use in combat. As far as exploration goes, this is kind of the game's biggest flaws, especially if you're looking more for a Breath of the Wild type game. Breath of the Wild, again, a different game, has a huge overworld to explore and a lot of things to do in it. This time being more of a Dynasty Warrior, your battles are more set pieces, so your exploration is limited. But on an occasion, a Korok or a treasure chest can be found and open for extra loot. But what the game does right is the amount of side quests you have and the way they offer them to you. Hit a certain level, do one side quest or another, and this might open another side quest on the map. But there are plenty of these to do, and they usually take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. They all come with bonuses and experience points, throw in a decent cooking system, and that does give you good bonuses if you decide to use it, and a decent synthing system to improve your weapons, and doing these side quests are incredibly rewarding. And you can replay them too if you want extra money or just looking for a way to kill 10 minutes at a time. And there are tons of things that open up after you beat the game's main storyline. So any bad things to really say about this game? Well, it does avoid being either too frustrating or too tedious like a lot of other Dynasty Warrior games I played. It does run into the press Y 5 times and then press X repeatedly to win problem. Not as nearly as bad as some of the other Dynasty Warrior spin-offs I've played, but it does get there in some of the longer stages. Overall, though, I thought this game was solid, and it's the first Dynasty Warriors game that I actually wanted to play more of and to complete some of the post-game stuff. I never really have wanted to do that in a Dynasty Warriors game, so I have to give Koei Tecmo props here. Let me start off by saying I do love the game's set designs. With the game set in a pre-Breath of the Wild world, running around things like Hyrule Town outposts that exist below the Great Plateau, and seeing how the town looked like it was before the calamity destroyed it, or even the Great Plateau itself being this kind of little fortress town. I remember failing the first mission on the Great Plateau because I was just running around looking at the set design with the Temple of Time being there and everything. It really was a wonder to behold, and it was what really helped me enjoy this game, was just the way the set designs were used. They're clever in their uses. They know what areas of the Breath of the Wild look like, how to have them new and restored. So you get a lot of what you saw in the Breath of the Wild with the new coat of paint, and it's terrific. As far as performance, I saw a few dips here and there, but nothing that slipped me up. And a lot of Dynasty Warriors games do have a few odd camera angles, and that did happen here. But for the most part, the game ran smoothly enough most of the time, and I did enjoy the Breath of the Wild-esque set pieces. The music has some nice remixes to them, but they're based on Breath of the Wild tunes. Nothing really comparable to classic Zelda games though, but there's a lot of nice touches with the music. As far as voice acting goes, it seems to be much improved from Breath of the Wild, and there's a lot more of it in these cutscenes. It fits the game nicely, and overall I really did enjoy the game's music and sound.
We still need a night gritty enough to see all the darkness, and they're nowhere to be found.
Yes.
Although, hey, if you see anybody that...
Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is not Breath of the Wild, and it never tries to be Breath of the Wild. What you get is a nice, fast action game with a lot of strategy and nuance thrown in. A lot of improvements among the basic Dynasty Warriors, like a lot of optional side quests and a good smithing option, make this one of the best Dynasty Warrior games I've ever played. Just not one of the best Zelda games. Is it worth $60? Well, I did put in about 40 hours into the game, and I'm still playing it somewhat, so I want to say yeah, but check out the demo first if you can rent it, definitely. It still has some of the Dynasty Warriors problems. They've been smoothed out a lot. But if you're looking more for Breath of the Wild, this might be a skip. You guys have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for watching my video. Hope to see you soon.
Ha!